Sound is just vibrating air. That's not a poetic reduction, that's the physics. Pressure waves, compressions and rarefactions, moving through the atmosphere at 343 meters per second. Molecules bumping into molecules, passing the disturbance along. That's what reaches your ear when you listen to music. Organized pressure fluctuations, nothing more. And yet, a specific sequence of those pressure fluctuations can make you weep, can make you feel for a moment that something vast and true is happening, something you can't quite name, can retrieve with extraordinary precision an emotional state you haven't felt in years, can make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Vibrating air should not be able to do that. There's no obvious reason it should. And yet here we are. Every human culture in recorded history has made music, and every one of them has used it to access emotion. The question isn't just interesting, it's genuinely strange. And the answer, when you follow it carefully, reaches into neuroscience, evolutionary biology, the physics of sound, and finally, honestly, into something that science can describe, but not yet fully explain. I'm Paul Dirac. Let's think about this properly. Start with the brain. Not music yet, the brain first. Because understanding how music works requires understanding something that most people don't know about how the brain processes anything. Your brain is not a passive receiver. It doesn't sit there waiting for information to arrive and then react to it. It constantly, actively predicts. Every fraction of a second, your auditory cortex is building a model of what it expects to hear next, based on pattern, rhythm, frequency relationships, everything it's learned from a lifetime of hearing sounds. The brain is always one step ahead, generating a forecast and then comparing the forecast to what actually arrives. When the prediction matches, smooth, comfortable processing. When the prediction is violated, a signal, a jolt, an update required. Music is the art of controlling that prediction cycle. A melody sets up an expectation. Your brain, after a few notes, has built a model of where it's going. A chord establishes a harmonic context. Your auditory system, trained by thousands of hours of musical exposure, knows what resolution should sound like, when the tension should release, where the phrase wants to go. And a skilled composer, or even a good songwriter, plays with that expectation. Satisfying it at the expected moment, pleasure. Delaying it, tension. Violating it completely, surprise. Satisfying it in an unexpected way, something more complex, a feeling that defies easy labeling. The emotion isn't in the notes, it's in the relationship between what your brain predicted and what it received. Now add dopamine. In 2011, Valerie Salimpour and her colleagues published a study that genuinely changed the neuroscience of music. They measured dopamine release in people listening to music that gave them chills, using PET scanning combined with dopamine binding measurements. And they found something precise and interesting. Dopamine was released in two distinct phases. First, during the anticipation, the build-up, the few seconds before the emotionally powerful moment, and second, at the peak itself, the moment of resolution or climax. Two separate dopamine hits, one for expecting, one for receiving. Your brain rewards itself for correctly predicting the emotional peak, and then rewards itself again for experiencing it. This is the same dopamine circuitry that evolution built for food, for sex, for social bonding, for survival critical rewards. And music found a way in. Not through calories or reproduction or social alliance, through organized pressure waves that match and then subvert the brain's prediction machinery at exactly the right moments. This is why the few seconds before your favorite part of a song can feel almost as intense as the part itself. Your brain is already celebrating. It knows what's coming. It's priming the reward. And when the moment arrives, the resolution, the drop, the key change, the vocal peak, it fires again. Music hacked the reward system, using nothing but air. And then there's the physical response, the chills. Somewhere between 50 and 70% of people experience what researchers call frisson, the goosebumps, the hair standing up, the physical shiver in response to a piece of music. Not everyone, but a majority. And frisson is not a metaphor for emotional response. It's a real physiological event involving the autonomic nervous system, the same involuntary system that controls your response to cold, to sudden fear, to physical threat. Think about that. A passage of music, a string section swelling, a voice cracking at exactly the right moment, can trigger the same physical response as encountering a predator. The same cascade, autonomic activation, piloerection, a shift in body state. Why? The leading explanation is that the brain's threat detection and significance detection systems are briefly co-opted by an intense, unexpected pattern event. The surprise, the prediction violation that's large enough and meaningful enough, trips a wire that evolution put there for different reasons. Your nervous system briefly treats the musical moment as something that matters physically, not just something you're thinking about, something happening to you. The chills are your body taking music seriously in a way your conscious mind knows isn't quite warranted. And it happens anyway. Now, why do certain chords sound sad? Why does a minor key carry weight that a major key doesn't? This one is more complicated than it looks. There's an acoustic component. Minor chords contain interval relationships, particularly the minor third and the flattened seventh, that produce more beating when played together. Beating is what happens when two close frequencies interact and produce a rapid fluctuation in amplitude, a kind of roughness, a wavering quality. The auditory system associates this roughness with tension, with something unresolved. It's a physical property of the sound itself, not just an association. But here's what makes this interesting rather than simple. The cultural component is enormous. Studies of listeners from musical traditions with no exposure to Western harmony, including isolated communities in remote regions, show different and sometimes absent emotional associations with the same chord structures that feel obviously sad or happy to a Western ear. The association is not hardwired into human auditory processing. It's learned, deeply learned, reinforced over years of exposure, so deeply embedded it feels inevitable, but learned nonetheless. What this means is that the same sound can carry completely different emotional meaning depending on what your brain was taught to expect. The emotion is real, the physiological response is real, but the specific trigger, the particular harmonic structure that unlocks sadness in you, was built partly by your culture, your exposure, your history. Music doesn't have a fixed emotional meaning. It has a meaning that your brain constructed over time and now receives as though it were obvious. But there's a mechanism that runs deeper than culture, older, more fundamental. Your voice changes when you're emotional, not randomly, in precise, measurable ways. Fear raises pitch, increases tempo, adds breathiness. Grief slows everything down, drops to lower registers, smooths the dynamic variation. Joy brightens timbre, adds rhythmic irregularity, increases energy. These vocal patterns are not conventions. They evolved because communicating emotional state through voice had survival value for the listener who needed to read another person's state and for the speaker signaling theirs. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the human auditory system became exquisitely sensitive to these vocal parameters, and music, almost universally, mimics them. A slow, low, smoothly descending melodic line matches the acoustic profile of grief in voice. A fast, bright, rhythmically energetic phrase matches the profile of excitement. A sudden, loud intrusion matches the alarm call. Music composed in any culture tends to use the same acoustic parameters that emotionally charged voices use, because the listener's auditory system is already tuned to extract emotional information from exactly those parameters. Your brain evolved to read voices. Music reads your brain. The instruments are a larynx by other means, and your auditory system, ancient and finely calibrated, responds to the emotional information in the sound without caring where it came from. Now, memory. Because this is where music's emotional power gets personal rather than universal. Musical memory is unusually robust. When a piece of music is encoded in memory, it engages multiple systems simultaneously: the auditory cortex, the motor system, the limbic system, the hippocampus. The encoding is rich and redundant, which is why musical memories persist through conditions, dementia, certain brain injuries that destroy other types of memory. Why musicians can recall pieces they learned decades ago. Why you can hear 4 notes of a song and be immediately back in a specific moment of your past. But there's something more specific than robustness. There's a period, roughly ages 15 to 25, during which autobiographical memories are encoded with unusual emotional intensity. Psychologists call this the reminiscence bump. The memories from this period are disproportionately vivid, disproportionately emotionally significant, and music heard during this period becomes permanently associated with those memories and the emotional states attached to them. When you hear a song from that time in your life, you're not just remembering. The brain is partially reconstructing the emotional state you were in when you first encoded that music. The neurochemistry shifts, the emotional tone returns, not as a thought about the past, but as something closer to the feeling itself, momentarily present again. The song is a key, the encoded memory is the lock, and what opens is not recollection, but re-experiencing. Not quite the emotion, but the shape of it, the flavor, close enough to feel real. That's why old music hits differently, not because the music changed, because you brought more to it, and it gives some of it back. Now, I want to be honest about the boundary of what we understand, because I think that honesty is more interesting than false completeness. We can map the neural correlates of musical emotion with considerable precision. We know that the nucleus accumbens releases dopamine during musical reward. We know the amygdala activates in response to emotionally charged passages. We know the default mode network, associated with self-referential processing and memory, lights up in ways that correlate with emotional depth of response. We can predict with reasonable accuracy which musical features, tempo, mode, harmonic complexity, dynamic variation, will produce which measurable responses in which populations. What we cannot explain is why any of this feels like anything. Why does dopamine release in response to a musical climax feel like beauty? Why does a slowly descending minor phrase feel like longing rather than simply triggering the behavioral and physiological correlates of longing? The neural activity is measurable. The feeling is not. We know the brain event. We don't know why the brain event is accompanied by an inner experience at all. This is the hard problem of consciousness, the question of why physical processes in a brain give rise to subjective experience applied to music. And it is as genuinely open as it ever was. Every discovery about the neuroscience of musical emotion adds another layer of mechanism. None of them close the gap between the mechanism and the experience, between the firing neuron and the feeling of sadness, between the dopamine molecule and the sense of beauty. We can describe the neural music. We cannot explain what it's like to hear it. And here's where I want to leave you, because I think this earns the right to be said. A sound wave exists in the physical world, complete, measurable, indifferent. The same wave hits every ear in the room identically. The physics doesn't change. But the sadness in a cello line, the specific, personal, wordless feeling of a piece of music that sounds exactly like something you've never been able to name, that doesn't exist in the sound wave. It doesn't exist in the air. It doesn't exist in any physical description of what's happening. It exists only in the relationship between organized sound and a mind prepared by biology and history and culture and a particular life to receive it. Music is a collaboration. The composer writes one half. The listener writes the other. The sound is the same for everyone in the room. The music is different for every single person. One person hears their mother. Another hears a summer that ended badly. Another hears something they've never experienced but somehow recognize. The same pressure waves, completely different meaning. That difference between the sound wave and the feeling is not a small thing. It's not a detail to be filled in later by neuroscience. It's one of the most extraordinary things about being a conscious creature. The universe produces pressure waves, organized, patterned, mathematically describable vibrations in air. And you, with your prediction machinery, your dopamine circuits, your ancient voice-reading auditory system, your accumulated memory and loss and longing, produce meaning from them. Nothing in physics required that to be possible. Nothing in chemistry necessitated it. And yet here it is, a pressure wave that makes you feel something you couldn't feel any other way. That gap between the vibration and the feeling is where you live. It's where music lives. And it may be the most interesting thing about being human that we don't yet have an equation for. I don't have one either, not yet.